In this video, I want to have a look at fractions, decimals, and percentages, and how we can convert between those three things. So we can write one number as a fraction, a decimal, or a percentage, and it's just three different ways of representing the same number. So if we have a look, if we have a decimal and we want to write it as a percentage instead, we would have to multiply it by 100. Now, if we're going the other way, if we've got a percentage and we're trying to write it as a decimal, we would want to divide by 100. So these two are the most straightforward. After that, they get slightly more complicated. So if we wanted to convert from a fraction to a percentage, there's actually a step in between. So we're not going to go straight from a fraction to a percentage. Instead, we'd convert from a fraction to a decimal. And then we can convert from a decimal to a percentage. So the fraction to a decimal, we'll have a look at how to do that down here. And then a decimal to a percentage is when we times by 100. For our next one, we've got converting from a percentage to a fraction. So percent means out of 100. So if we're going from a percent to a fraction, we're going to write the number we have over 100, so write it as a fraction, and then we'll simplify that fraction down into its simplest form. Okay, if we're going from a fraction to a decimal, there's two different ways we can do it. One is that I think there's probably three. The first one is that we can do long division. The second is that we could write it as a fraction, but we can change it into an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 10, 100, or 1,000, or anything else like that. And the third way of doing it, if you've got a calculator with you, is on your calculator you've got a button that says SD, and that converts between fractions and decimals. So we could also use that one here, because it goes the other way, so we could use that SD button again. But again, we only want to use that sometimes. If we can't do it any of these other ways, it's good to practice doing it without a calculator first. The other way to do the decimals to fractions without a calculator is similar to this. So we would write it as a fraction over 10 or 100 or 1,000, depending on how many decimal places it had. So if it had one decimal place, we'd write it over 10. If it had two decimal places, we'd write it over 100. 3, we'd write it over 1,000, and so on. And then we would simplify. So let's have a look at some examples of converting between fractions, decimals, and percentages. All right, so we're asked to complete this table. The first one, we're given a fraction, and then a decimal, and then a percentage, but we need to convert this fraction to fill in the blanks of a decimal and a percentage. All right, so from a fraction to a decimal, again, there is that SD button on your calculator, but we're going to try and do it without that. So the first thing I want to do is I want to write this as an equivalent fraction, but with a denominator of either 10 or 100 or 1,000. So we can write this with a denominator of 10, because if we times the denominator by 2, so 5 times 2 would give us 10, which means we have to do the same thing to the numerator. So 2 times 2 would give us 4. So now if we've got 4 over 10, that means 4 divided by 10. And we know that if we're dividing a number by 10, then we move the decimal point one place to the left. So that's going to give us 0.4. Now, the other way to do that, sometimes a number doesn't nicely go into 10 or 100 or 1,000. The other way to do it is long division. So we have 2 and we want to divide by 5. Now, 5 doesn't fit into 2, so we're going to put a 0. And then we're going to have to introduce our decimals, and we'll add another 0 after that decimal point. Now, because it didn't fit in at all, that means we've got 2 remainders, so we'll carry it over. And then 5 fits into 20 4 times. So it's a different way of getting our 0.4. Now that we have it as a decimal, changing it to a percentage is quite easy. So we can go 0.4 and times that by 100. When we times by 100, our decimal point will move 2 places to the right. So that would give us 40%. All right, let's have a look at our second example. We've got a decimal of 0.12. Let's go to a percentage. So let's times by 100. So we would end up with 12% because we've moved the decimal point 2 places to the right. To write it as a fraction, I'm going to write it as 12 in the numerator. And in the denominator, I have to figure out whether I'm going to have a 10 or a 100 or 1,000, however many it is. If we're working from the decimal, you can see that we've moved it 2 places. So that means we're going to have it over 100 because 100 has 2 zeros. The other way you can think of it is a percentage. 12% means 12 out of 100. So we can write it as 12 over 100. And then we want to simplify that down. So if we divide the top and the bottom both by 4, 12 divided by 4 would give us 3, and 100 divided by 4 would give us 25. So that's our simplified fraction. All right, now last one, we've got 35%. If we want to write that as a decimal, we're going to move the decimal point 2 places to the left, so we'd have 0.35. And writing it as a fraction would be 35 out of 100. If we simplify that down, divide top and bottom both by 5, we'd end up with 7 over 20. So that's having a look at converting between fractions, decimals, and percentages.